Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Hello. I hope you're having a beautiful day. This conversation is going to be really interesting for you. I know if you've pressed play on this episode, you're interested in this topic, and I'm really excited to introduce an amazing guest to you today, Tash Duffin from Whole Child Co. So today we are talking about the link between oral function, sleep, and ADHD, whether it's an ADHD diagnosis or it's ADHD-like behaviours, and the link when it comes to oral function and sleep. So as I said, Tash has been on the podcast before. We've had a chat about reflux. We're very like-minded. You know, when we talk off air, we're always nodding away to each other. You know, we've got a really similar approach to children's health, although she has different expertise than we do here at Natural Super Kids. So Tash is an orofacial myofunctional therapist. I always struggle to get those words out. She's an occupational therapist as well. And she does a lot in the pediatric feeding space, infant and early childhood sleep quality, and infant reflux. And she's a mother of 3, so she knows what she's talking about from a practical mum life lens as well. So I just love this conversation. She brings up so many interesting bits of information that are going to be valuable for you if your child has been diagnosed with ADHD, or if you're a little concerned or wanting to manage some of those behaviours, impulsivity, hyperactivity, and of course, sleep challenges. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Here's Tash. Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast again, Tash. It's so good to have you here.
So good to be back. Thanks for having me.
Yes, it's so good to have you back. We've had you on the podcast before. I'll make sure that episode is linked in the show notes. In that episode, we talked about reflux. That was a little while ago.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know you and what you do you want to just give a bit of an intro before we get into this chat?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Tash. I am a bit of a mix of things. I am an occupational therapist. I'm an orofacial myofunctional therapist, and I work in sleep and specifically sleep quality for kids in early childhood. And because all of those things are interlinked. Also a mum of 3, and prevalent to what we're going to be talking about today. 2 of my children have had oral dysfunction, and I've lived this experience of sleep disordered breathing, upper airway resistance syndrome, and one of my kids is diagnosed as ADHD as well. So I'm not only coming at it from a clinician's perspective, but also a mum perspective, which I think brings an extra layer of understanding to all the nuances and the real life experience of that, and what the research and the data and all that kind of means to live. So
yes. Definitely. I love that. And I feel like, I'm always talking about gut health and how it links to everything. And I feel like oral function and breathing is the same. It really links to so many of the things that we support families with. But today we are going to be talking about ADHD and ADHD sort of type behaviours and what the link is there with oral function and sleep quality. So when we're talking about those ADHD type behaviours, the poor focus, the hyperactivity, the impulsivity, how much of that can overlap with poor quality sleep?
Essentially, you can't separate the two. There is really significant overlap, and to the point where it's beyond a correlation. It's not like we see these two things that run side by side. There is, a good evidence and research that poor sleep can cause or promote or exacerbate ADHD type behaviours or a presentation of ADHD. And essentially the link there is that the brain needs good quality sleep to get, deep restorative sleep for attention, impulse control, and emotional regulation. Those things, those symptoms that we and it could be just the behaviours rather than a diagnosis itself, but those things that are cornerstone of an ADHD diagnosis, or just impulsivity, that kind of stuff, like in a kid that's not diagnosed. The fragmented sleep means that the prefrontal cortex is under functioning, essentially. And we know that as an adult, if you have, a really rubbish night of sleep or a run of rubbish nights of sleep, your impulse control is impacted. You're going to fly off the handle more easily. Your focus is poorer. Your attention, same thing. The difference we see with kids is the hyperactivity. So most adults, if we're really tired, we don't tip into that kind of hyperactive state, but children very often do. So it looks like that kind of second wind, those wired and tired kids, their body, almost like a survival mechanism to keep going, rather than wind down like an adult might. But yeah, there is just so much overlap that we can't separate the two. And as we'll get into as we go along, I'm sure, that when sleep is fragmented with something like sleep disordered breathing and things like that, it's these repeated micro arousals throughout the night that are impacting the sleep quality. And like when we look at kids that have uh, um, reduction in, suboptimal airflow overnight, it's kind of, if you imagine like someone going, excuse me, like, 50, 60, 100 times a night, even if you're not waking fully, it'll bring you out of that full sleep cycle that you're meant to be transitioning through. So you miss out on those deep restorative phases. And you can if you have a kid standing by your bed, waking you up, touching you every 20, 30 minutes, you're not going to be well rested, and you're not going to be able to function optimally the next day. So they're so intertwined. Can't be separated.
Yes. And I think that's such a good example. And I think many of us mums, although I'm well past those, early years of having, when we have young babies that don't sleep well and we're jolted awake, every hour, every couple of hours, it's that similar feeling, of that very fragmented sleep. And we all remember how that makes us feel.
Yes, we do. Yet we go on to have more.
Yeah, I know. Some of us more than others. I only went twice. But yes, I love the way that you sort of explained that. And then so we're talking about, I mean, this might be a bit controversial, but I think we can go there. What do you think there are times where there might be an overdiagnosis of ADHD when it's simply sort of poor quality sleep and airway issues instead?
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, gold standard yet is not to screen for sleep symptoms. And I know, because I've gone through and I knew exactly what I needed to be asked by the practitioners doing the diagnosing. And, maybe there was how's a sleep thing, and you ticked it. But even with an ENT history and things like that, no one ever delved into and asked me, what's the quality of sleep like? Is the mouth open? Anything like that. So unfortunately, it's not part of, in my experience, that diagnostic process. And there is, depending on which research you look at, there is some evidence that, between 20 to even as high as 50% of kids with ADHD have sleep disorder breathing. And some have obviously both. And the evidence shows that when the kids that you have both and you treat the sleep, their ADHD symptoms reduce significantly because they're better rested. And then there is a cohort that actually it's not a neurotype, it's just chronic, fragmented, poor quality sleep. So they're getting through the day with that poor attention, with that poor impulse control, emotionally dysregulated because they're so tired. So
Yeah.
tired. Yeah.
Yeah, makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And so where does airway health come into all of this?
So it's and I guess maybe let's I'll go a little about what I'm talking about in terms of sleep disordered breathing. So sleep disordered breathing exists along a spectrum. There is intermittent open mouth breathing. Then we got, your chronic mouth breathing, your intermittent snoring, chronic snoring, mild apnea, severe apnea, all that way along. So there is a very big spectrum. And unfortunately, kind of a lot in the mainstream, the focus is on a diagnosis of obstructive sleep apnea, kind of from mild, moderate to severe. Those kids, if they're asked, tend to be the ones that are offered the intervention. These more milder forms are, in my experience, parents are very much told they're fine. They'll grow out of it. Don't worry about it. They're not unwell, basically. And they're not unwell, but they're not sleeping optimally. So along that spectrum, the physiological impacts of that suboptimal oxygenation are very different when you're having a lot of full-on obstructive events versus just kind of not optimal down this other end of the spectrum. But neurologically, it's still that excuse me overnight, and the brain being in a hypervigilant state and not getting the restorative sleep that we need. And so optimizing that airway health, that oral function early is where we can change that trajectory. And there's a really, it's an old study now, and it's a robust study of over 11,000 children, and it's a longitudinal study that looks at early life sleep disordered breathing symptoms and behavioural impacts at like 4 and 7 years old and things like that. And one of the conclusions is something like that early life symptoms, there's a high correlation. It's 40 or 60%, something like that. And the recommendation is to intervene as early as the first year of life. So when we come up against, as parents, this repeated, like, oh, they'll be fine, they'll be fine. Actually, the evidence says we shouldn't be sitting on our hands and waiting for that, because those early life symptoms still can impact and it's because of all that busy brain stuff that happens when our kids are sleeping in those early years, that growth, those synapses, that memory consolidation, all that kind of stuff. So if you're not getting into all those stages of sleep because you're not breathing properly and your brain's just worried about keeping it alive, then it's not busy doing all those other things.
All those important brain development kind of things. Yeah, makes so much sense. And as you said, there's that spectrum. So even some kids that are being diagnosed with the more severe forms of sort of sleep apnea or sleep disordered breathing. But then there's so many kids, and I can think of so many that we see that, they're maybe 6, 8, 10, and we bring up, are they mouth breathers? And parents don't know, and they're like, oh yeah, we noticed last night, yeah, they do breathe through the mouth when they're sleeping, and it hasn't even been picked up yet. I guess like that sort of maybe milder sort of end of the spectrum. So it is a really big issue.
Yeah, it's huge. It's I can't think of the stat now, but like it's a huge percentage of the kind of even like the preschool population, early childhood population that mouth breathe during sleep, and it's so common that people think it's normal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you even see the pictures of, your friends' babies and kids that are asleep with their mouths open, and you're like, hey, you might want to do something about that. Not that we do, but yeah, like it's, I'm sure, that people listening have seen that and maybe
Mm.
you might be more aware of it now. So yeah, definitely take notice of your kids. What are some of the things that we can be looking out for, in kids from very young to older? Is it whether they're breathing out, whether they've got their mouth open when they're sleeping? Is that one of the big ones?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and daytime rest posture as well. So, but not always. So sometimes a kid might be able to breathe through their nose during the day, but at nighttime is when the mouth pops open and we start mouth breathing. So nighttime breathing. So if and really, really importantly, the point I want to drive home is they don't have to be snoring, and they don't have to be snoring loudly, and they don't have to be snoring every single night. There is these more mild, which we term upper airway resistance syndrome. So if there is some resistance, mild resistance to nasal airflow when we're sleeping and we pop our mouth open, that would be termed like an upper airway resistance syndrome. So there might be audible breathing, snoring, obviously, pauses in breathing. They're the really obvious ones that you'll notice when they're asleep. But then there's other kind of sleep symptoms that you can look out for, like really restless sleep. And if you're like, well, I don't sleep with my kid, if they wake up with a hair that's like a rat's nest, that's a pretty decent sign. If they fall out of bed, if their sheets are in a tangle, that's a really good sign that a really reliable sign that their sleep is restless. Things like bedwetting, that there obviously is a range of where wearing a nappy is normal, but if you're kind of like you're getting towards the end of that age range, you're thinking, well, like they're wet through every night, that can be an airway sign. And then some things like daytime, as I mentioned, to that oral rest posture, but I would always check nighttime as well, because as I said, they can be different things. But then things in, waking with bad breath, that means that they've been breathing through their mouth. And actually drool on the pillow or on the sheets, that's another sign that the mouth is open. But then daytime things like a licking habit, which might mean that their lips are dry. So that then they've got dry lips. Their low forward tongue, which you would see with the mouth open, little dark circles under the eyes, and that can be a number of things, and can be because they're tired. But again, that all kind of links in. What else? Let me
Grinding, like keep
grinding.
grinding.
Yes, yep, grinding, sweaty sleeping, and I guess waking frequently, but they might not fully wake and come and seek you. So if you feel like your child has been asleep long enough, but they wake up and, or they're complaining they're tired, you can see like by 11 o'clock they're done. Every time you get in the car after 11 o'clock and longer than 20 minutes, they're asleep. And then they're catching flies in the car, that kind of stuff. What else? There are some, yes, really
Yeah.
common, obvious ones. Yeah.
Yeah. Fussy eating?
Yes, fussy eating. Yep. And that is a bit of a double-edged sword, as you'll
Of
know,
course.
because the any nutrient deficiencies that come from selective eating, then that impacts sleep quality even further. But the oral function link is that, and the airway link is that if you can't breathe through your nose, or say your tongue doesn't move really well to lateralize food in the oral cavity, you tend to gravitate away from things that are harder to chew, because if you think about it, if you've got like a bit of chewy meat, how we would eat that is lips together. On one side, we use our tongue to move that over to the other side. Move it back and forth. Then we need our tongue to have good mobility to form that nice cohesive bolus, and then we swallow. So if we can't breathe through our nose, we start doing like quite an immature, or don't progress to a more mature chew pattern, but we've got that immature chew pattern. So that just standalone, like the breakdown of the food is reduced. We might then have that might fatigue to switch the food from side to side, and it gets tiring. So we just say, well, I'm not going to eat that meat, and so it's a bit of a bi-directional thing there,
Yeah,
because you've got to
definitely.
choose to breathe or eat. and the body will choose to breathe.
Yeah, breathing is a bit more important in the
Yeah.
moment. So
Yes.
yeah, those kids, and we see a lot of this, and obviously fussy eating is multifactorial. There's all kinds of things
absolutely.
that contribute to it. But yeah, that the sensory kind of stuff, and kids that don't tend to want to eat. Yeah, those things that are harder to chew. But then again, that's a bit of a catch-22 as well, because we need kids to be chewing to develop that oral function, don't we?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So it's that snowball. So that's why trying to identify these signs and not just sitting and waiting. Like as soon as you see them, that's what I advocate for all the time. And there is a point where some interventions we have to wait for because of age, but there's always things you can be doing in the background. And say chewing, for example, if we can't get those harder to eat foods in, then maybe we move to still offer them, but then we offer also some other kind of more therapy based, like chew tools, that kind of stuff, to build that strength, to then hopefully then that gives us a bit of rollover to functional eating, chewing.
Yes,
Swallowing.
I think that's really helpful, rather than just going, my child just wants the soft foods that are easy for them to eat. And moving away from those harder foods altogether. Yeah, I think it's helpful for parents to know that there are tools and things we can do to develop that the chewing.
Yeah,
strength.
the chewing and yeah.
I feel like I'm using the wrong terminology, but yeah. And it's also linked, like, feeding and breathing. Obviously very important that our kids are doing this correctly. And I think this conversation is really highlighting how many kids have issues in these areas that really need to be addressed. So what about the relationship between airway compromise and the fight or flight response in children, which really does tie into ADHD and neurodivergence as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially we obviously want the parasympathetic nervous system to be the one that is in control when we're asleep. Parasympathetic: rest, digest, restore. The three lovely things we would like from our sleep. So when we have, again, even those more mild forms of sleep disordered breathing, so the upper airway resistance, but then also obviously the more severe types, when we've got, and I like to call it like suboptimal oxygenation, like it's not as good as it could be, the brain is hypervigilant to that during sleep. So it is the brain is always scanning for threat or safety subconsciously. So that suboptimal oxygenation is a threat to the nervous system. So what it does is activates that sympathetic fight, flight, freeze response, which means that the brain's not worried about getting into that deep restorative consolidated sleep. It's concerned with, we got to watch, is that tiger coming for us? Is that tiger coming for us? Yeah, the danger. And remains hypervigilant throughout the night. So that could look like waking and being distressed, or it could look like a kid that kind of sleeps, as inverted commas, enough, but is just waking up really tired because they're not getting that quality. And there's a bit of a I guess a bidirectional relationship there as well. Like, so you start your day with more sympathetic arousal, and part of, for some kids that neurotype of ADHD, there is that hyper arousal kind of baseline as well. So then we're kind of building on building, and we just see this escalation. So that's how when you've got the two happening, when you can at least get the sleep quality sorted, then we can get some improvement in symptoms. But essentially it's like that hypervigilance of the nervous system to be like, I'm not concerned with getting deep sleep, I'm concerned with managing safety and avoiding that danger all night.
Yeah, and I think a couple of points that you've brought up a few times is one, we don't always know that our kids aren't sleeping well. It doesn't mean that they're up and, in our bed constantly. Like, they can be not getting that good quality of sleep but still sleeping. So that can make it quite confusing for parents. And then the other one of like, that real hyperactive behavior where the last thing we're thinking of is they're tired.
Yeah.
So that I think it's hard to tease all of this apart. So this conversation is so important.
And that that wiredness it comes from that stress response, that cortisol, that adrenaline, that, and it's, you know, it becomes this cycle because then, and also then with ADHD, some kids will have, you know, their circadian rhythm is on a later phase than other neurotypical peers. So they've got that anyway. So they've got that delayed sleep onset. And then we add in that they've got this running around cortisol, adrenaline that makes it even harder to fall asleep. So then we're reducing the sleep span as well. It's, yeah, you can see how kids can fall into this, and you think, well, they can't go to sleep any earlier, but it's they yeah, with the right conditions and looking at everything really holistically, you can hopefully make some adjustments to
sort of shift that. Yeah.
shift it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so important.
Mm.
So if parents suspect that sleep quality or oral function, you know, are sort of off or maybe contributing to their child's ADHD-like behaviours, what are some of the things that they can do? Some practical tips? Where can they start?
So looking at those red flags, and what I would say also is look at different times of the night, because there might, if you're only ever checking at 8 o'clock once they've got, you know, or 9:30 when you go to bed or whatever it is, then maybe that's what's happening at that point of the night. But things can be happening at different points of the night. So I would, observe any red flags, and, you know, even just start to correlate them. If you see some or hear some snoring, audible breathing, you see the open mouth, oh, that's another thing, like funny sleeping positions. So with the head back, cranked back like that, or bottom up in the air, those types of things, they're a kid trying to manage their airway. So if you see those things, take pictures of them, take videos of them to show a practitioner. And then it's, you know, like, start with your GP. However, if you come up against, they'll be fine, they'll grow out of it, there's nothing to worry about, then, you know, you might look onto it, but you also may not. Know that you're warranted in investigating it further, and it's about finding the right practitioner that is going to take your concerns seriously and look at the broader spectrum of the impacts of this. Because if it's not your specialty, then knowing all these other little things that go, yeah, okay, well, look at that eating, look at that posture, look at how we're sitting, we can't sit still, look at this, and you can pull that all together. And so if you start with an airway assessment with an orofacial myofunctional therapist, we can pull together all those things, put it in a report, and go, hey, this is why we need to. It's not just because they're a little bit, I can hear them breathing when they're, because when we look at that holistic picture, then that can spark action. An orofacial myofunctional therapist can also help, you know, because there can be a lot of reasons why we're mouth breathing, and that's that you've got to work with someone to understand why it's happening for your child, because then that's where you direct your intervention. The only solution is not removal of adenoids and tonsils. It sometimes is one, but then there's also stuff, as you well know, before that we want to look at, like, why are those adenoids and tonsils enlarged? So we can come right back to the base, why we're mouth breathing, and we then target our intervention there. You sometimes, unfortunately, have to keep pushing.
Yeah, really have to advocate, don't you? Because
Yes.
I think a lot of people that go to the GP and say, oh, I'm a bit concerned about how my child's breathing at night, or, you know, they are not going to be well listened to, or, there's going to be a like, oh, that's not a problem. So, it really is about parents, you know, advocating for their
Yeah,
kids. And
unfortunately, it is. Yeah.
yeah.
And finding that right practitioner. And then there is, you know, different things that you can do across the lifespan, that support nasal breathing, support tongue to palate, that kind of stuff. So, you know, as we touched on a little bit with the eating, like offering kind of from the get-go foods that are going to help build that jaw growth, you know, treating any congestion. If your kid is like a baby, you can literally push their tongue up, close their lips, and every time they're having a little nap on you, create that motor pattern, create that proprioceptive awareness of tongue to palate, lips together, nose breathing. Obviously, we never want to hold that there. And actually, that's a good thing. Don't start with mouth tape. Do that under the guidance of a practitioner who knows that your child can breathe. We don't go, okay, well, mouth breathing, if I just close the lips, then they're not mouth breathing. They also might not be breathing. So don't start. Mouth breathing is, mouth tape is literally a Band-Aid. We can use it as part of a comprehensive treatment plan, but it doesn't treat the cause, and it doesn't kind of fix the things of the reason why mouth breathing is happening.
Yes, such an important point, because I think people see that on social media, and yes, like it can be part of it, but it's not the fix all.
No. And you don't want to be putting that on your kid if they are mouth breathing.
Yeah.
Because they're mouth breathing for a reason. So then other things, things that you might avoid or start to wean if you're noticing there's some oral dysfunction. So, things like dummies, making sure you get rid of them as early as you can, and I always advocate for like the soothe and remove method for those. So if you need to use it early on, there's, nothing particularly wrong with that, but we want to use it to soothe, and then we remove it. So we then create that opportunity for tongue to palate. Touched on like food that they can eat and chew, convenience foods and that are okay now and then, but we actually want our child to be using their oral muscles to eat. So even if, like a pouch, for example, that sucking it's so easy to get any calories. Like, why would you then go and chew on a piece of meat? So even squeezing that onto a spoon that they then have to use their lips to clear. So making them more active participants in the feeding process. So, and I guess I think I briefly said, like, managing any congestion, looking at allergies, that kind of stuff is a really important thing as well. And advocate.
Yeah, so many good tips, and obviously there's a lot to it. And I know you just sort of touched on tonsils and adenoids. Maybe we need to do another episode on tonsils and adenoids, because that is something that we support a lot of people with. And I love that you brought that in. That it's like just removing tonsils and adenoids isn't often the complete picture either.
No, because if we have to. But we have to ask why they're inflamed in the first place. And if we only focus there and we don't sort out why that was happening in the first place, then adenoids can grow back, turbinates can become re-enlarged, and we end up not at the place we wanted to be.
Yes. And that happens more often than people realize. We get those messages a lot. They got their adenoids removed, but now they've grown back. We need some help.
Yep.
So, that's a big topic that we didn't get to dive into today, but I think mentioning that is important. So let people know a bit more about what you offer and where they can find you.
So my business is Whole Child Co. So I'm on Instagram at Whole Child Co AU. And website is wholechildco.com.au. I offer one-on-one consults, so orofacial myofunctional therapy assessments and therapy. I do that online and in person. I also help support families with sleep as well. So if, smaller children through to wherever kind of 10, 12 that are still struggling with sleep, we can look at sleep really broadly, obviously with a huge focus on, is there anything physiological driving that sleep presentation? So I've got my one-on-ones, and I am excited that I am working in the background, and hopefully it's not too far away, on a membership that supports children, so from about 2+, so not babies, 2+, for kids that don't sleep, and looking at how we can look into what is driving that ongoing sleep difficulty past infancy. So we are looking at, basic sleep science, but a big focus on the nervous system, root causes, one of which is, the airway, the oral function stuff, and then looking at specific sleep problems that are persisting and how we treat them. So I'm very excited that that is coming soon.
Such a needed offer, and we will make sure all of the links to all of those are in the show notes. We'll have a wait list ready for the sleep membership as well, so people can pop their name on there if they are interested. And I think I think a lot of people I laugh how quickly you say orofacial myofunction therapy. I always have to say it so slowly.
It's a bit of an oxymoron, isn't it? It's like,
oh my gosh. But it's so good that there's more awareness on this therapy. There's more and more practitioners in this space like popping up. I feel like even a few years ago, there was very few people, but I think also people don't realize that you can see someone online for that service.
Yes. It's super easy. So people, the parent is my eyes basically, and do a lot of filming and photos and questionnaire, and then I pull it all together. But super easy to do online.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you so much. That's been really informative. And I encourage everyone to head on over and check out Whole Child Co on Instagram and on the website. And we'll make sure those links are below. Thanks so much, Tash.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Head on over to our website, naturalsuperkids.com, for the show notes for this episode, as well as a whole heap of inspiration to help you raise healthy and happy kids. I'll see you next week.